This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. It's episode 753, and this week we welcome Tom McGuire of Large Loss Mastery. We're going to talk about large disaster restoration projects and how large losses can sometimes make or break a company. Today we're going to learn from a pro on how to handle these business making or breaking events. But before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can continue doing the show. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification at iicrc.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at eia-usa.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com, BioPlanet at byoplanet.com, Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com, EMSL Analytical Inc. at emsl.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to report that no one correctly identified boredom as the number one reason engineers quit their jobs, so there was no correct answer to last week's IAQ Radio Trivia question. Here's today's IAQ Radio Trivia question. Who developed Type A, Type B personality theory, and to what did they credit their insight? Back to you, Joe.
All right, Cliff, thank you. That's a good one. I just want to finish a quick text before we get started here. Let's go. Tom McGuire is the founder and owner of Large Loss Mastery. He's a trainer, teacher, mentor, and learner. Tom is a 39-year large loss and disaster recovery veteran specializing in structural damage, restoration, decontamination, ambient control and stabilization, and vital document recovery, including vacuum and freeze drying systems. He has worked in and around the U.S. and internationally. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. It's an honor to be here with you guys. It's I've seen you forever, and we've known the same people for a very long time. I don't know why it's taken this long for us to get to be here together, but I'm very honored to be here with you guys.
Well, it's great to have you. Tom, tell our audience a little bit about your background.
Well, I started in the industry in 1986, and so I have to add one more little title to that, mentor. It's also a historian, because as of what I found out as I've been teaching, that most of the people in the audience are a lot younger than I am. And so there's part historian that's in there too. And so 1986 is a lot different than it is today, because really the 80s was kind of the first real decade of restoration in the United States as we know it. And so it was completely different. I was working for a company called MF Bank, the restoration company, when I first started. With a lot of the industry veterans that came out of BMS CAT. They started a company with the bank family in Minneapolis. And back then there weren't that many companies that did national work. There was probably only a handful that did work on a national level. Everybody was kind of regional in, cities and stuff. And so we had all the talent was really on a couple of companies. And so we had just an unbelievable, and I have to say that I've been very blessed to have worked with some of the most talented individuals on the planet. And they're still in the industry as consultants or CEOs or, owners or whatever they may be. And they're all, 40 plus veterans. And so when I started in 86, I came out of right out of college. I was doing asbestos abatement while I was doing college, and what I loved about asbestos abatement back then, you were young and you had all kinds of energy, and so we were in Vegas and it was crazy, but I could make enough money over the summer because we were early 20s making $30 an hour back in 1983 and 84,
Yeah.
85. And so I would take the year off. And so I had my apartment, and I had like a 3-bedroom apartment, and I rented every room was rented out. At one point, I even had a big walk-in closet. I even had somebody living in my walk-in closet, while I was going to school. So essentially what happened was I didn't even really pay rent or anything because everybody else covered it. And so from there, got involved in restoration, had some guys that left the asbestos world and went into fire and water damage restoration. And I was like, what the heck is that? This was 1985. And so the next thing I knew, I was in Dallas, Texas with a dry sponge in my hand, a Kim sponge, cleaning a wall after a fire. And I was like, okay, this is what this is all about.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't quite sure, when I was cleaning the wall, I was like, all right, did I make a mistake? Should I be back in school in Las Vegas? But it's been a blast. It's taken me all over the world. We've done projects in Singapore, Kuwait, Costa Rica, Mexico, Canada. And when I was hired by Mickey in Mickey Lee in 1994 with Munters. And so I spent 16 and a half years with Munters. And Mickey is still a dear friend. And in fact, I owe him a couple phone calls here after we get wrapped up here. But dear friend and mentor, and I love working with him. He's retired, but I coerce him out, for a couple hours. He zooms in for a couple hours. That's all I can get. And so he hired me there at Munters, and Munters was kind of where I learned about expert training, because Munters we trained all over the world. We trained in Italy, we'd be in the Azores, West Indies, Montreal. We were all over the place, and the training was just superb.
What kind of training, Tom? I'm just curious.
Well, when it's with Munters, it was senior training stuff, and so some of it was hardcore drawing, to where you're actually breaking out trigonometry, which I'm horrible at trig and algebra, and so I didn't do so well in those classes. But then we also had some senior level classes where or organizations where we got together and figured out, okay, what are the next steps of the organization going forward. And it was just phenomenal, and it's stuck with me. And so I've kind of plugged that into large loss mastery, and where large loss mastery came from was as the evolution of everything evolved, and it was 2015, and I was consulting with a company up in Milwaukee, and because I work with mid-level restoration companies that maybe they don't do a lot of large loss, and this is their first one. So I'll come in and I'll walk them through it, do the estimate, put the contract together, do everything for them, even manage the project for them if they want. And so I was up there, and I started to realize that, there's always been a gap in our industry, between the carrier side and the restorer side. And that gap has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger as time has gone on. And so now we have more players, and, you have TPAs, you have more third-party consultants, you have just so many more players than in 1986, when we started, we didn't have any of that stuff. In 86, we were heroes. They couldn't wait to see us show up on a job, and we would actually, end up that last invoice, we would fly to, Chicago or wherever, walk through that last job book and that last invoice and walk out with a check. And so things have changed dramatically. And so narrowing that gap became the focus of large loss mastery, in trying to narrow the gap between the restorer, the consultants, the carriers, because we're all on the same page. We're all doing, we all have the same mission in mind. And that's to keep the homeowner in their home, keep the business open, operating, keep people working. All of those things we all have in common, but there's just all of these, people let things get in the way of doing a successful job, doing the documentation correctly, and getting paid on time. And so there's an art to getting paid in our industry, but it really revolves around just doing the job right and documenting everything that you do. Because, like the old saying, if you don't document it, it didn't happen. And you can do an awesome job and do a horrible job with documentation. And the only thing that people are going to remember is your documentation. They're going to forget all about, you did a great job, because the last time they seen you, there was 4 feet of water in their building. Yeah. Now there's no water in the building. They're gone. They're moved on. And the only thing that's left of your loss is now your invoice. And the invoice can become what I call a disaster after the disaster. And you don't want that.
And I guess the third thing, I'm a kind of, onlooker in the restoration side of things. I've done a lot of indoor air and asbestos and so on, but it seems like it always comes down to communication. If you communicate well, you should do well. But Cliff, let me turn it over to you, buddy.
Okay, before I ask a question, we need to go back in history and just pick up on a couple of acronyms. First of all, MS Bank was a salvage company, and they used to go in after losses for insurance companies, and they would, take the inventory and salvage it or liquidate it or do whatever. And BMS stands for Blackman Mooring Steamatic, and then they turned into Blackman Mooring Cat. Right?
Yep. BMS Cat. Yep.
Gotcha. We got to get the acronym police back here.
Right.
I'll talk to Grayson about that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
My friends at BMS can correct me, but I think BMS Cat was born in 1980, in 81 is when the Cat part came into the Steamatic. And but yes, what happened with MF Bank, we were the salvage company, and then you had the restoration company. And that's where we came in. And it was a great experience with them. Again, super talented group. All together, we did the World Trade Center in 1993, which was just a phenomenal job. Still one of the largest projects ever done. And no one's ever done anything that big in 16 days, which is what we did, in 8.8 million square feet. And so, those things stick with you, and it's like it's a great memory that you just can't describe to people sometimes how cool it was to succeed on that project.
Okay, well, what was the hardest lesson? I mean, you've done a lot of large loss stuff, and what was the hardest lesson that you've ever learned?
The hardest lesson, and I'll give you one of my disasters after the disaster, which is one of mine. And one of the things I teach that I'm not afraid to, we all make mistakes. And one of the things I teach everybody in the classes is it's very important in our communication with the client that we guide them through the process. Here's what the loss is going to look like today. Here's what it's going to look like tomorrow. And here's what it's going to look like when we're done, because they've never been through it before. And so we had, it was 2008. We were out in Palo Alto, California, and at a major university out there. And they had a flash flood. It was one of the El Nino years, really bad El Nino year in California. And they had 58 buildings that were affected. And so This is when I was with Munters, and so we were coming on, and we had 58 buildings to set up. And I had this brilliant idea that we're going to get all 58 buildings set, within reason, in 48 hours, which was a big task, but we actually pulled it off, and we got everything. Everything wasn't completely finished, but the chancellor of the school wanted to see me, and when the chancellor wants to see you at the time a Pac-12 university, it's like, okay, and it's like, all right, what happened? And he said, Tom, why are you effing up my campus? And I was just getting ready to tell him, man, we got every building set up in 48 hours. Just like amazing, we're incredible. And he's like, so I told him, I said, well, we got all the buildings set up, we're rocking and rolling. He said, but you messed up the lawn. The forklifts were driving across the lawn, and you cracked the sidewalk. And so for us, in our mind, we were so focused on getting the building set up that we forgot about the small things. And it was the small things to the client that looked like we were making the loss worse. We thought we were superstars. We were getting everything set up in record time, but we messed up the lawn. Now, if I would have, from the very beginning, told him, and this is my lesson, here's what it's going to look like today. We're going to drive on the grass. We're going to mess the grass up. We're going to fix it. We might even crack a sidewalk. We're going to fix it. All that's going to be done. Here's our plan. Here's what it's going to look like today, tomorrow, and when we're done. And that was where I learned that lesson was you have to communicate with the client exactly what's going to happen. That wall is going to be gone tomorrow. When you show up, that wall is going to be gone. So when they show up, they know the wall is going to be gone. It doesn't make it's because in their mind, they've never been through a disaster before. And so it's our job to make sure that we guide them all the way through it so that they realize that we are the light at the end of the tunnel.
I think a lot of people have made the same mistake. And I think one of the I think another way to phrase it is things are going to get worse before they're going to get better. No, particularly if you're going to be tearing things apart and removing stuff and so on and so forth. But no, you're absolutely right, Abe. They'll go into shock when they come in and, I hired you to fix my house, not demolish it or whatever. So
exactly. It can look like the Money Pit, the movie, The Money Pit. You ever see it?
Right. Well,
what are they testing missiles here?
Yeah. Well, what basic foundational experience is needed to run a large loss?
Well, I would say, foundational experience or what's
no foundational experience. In order to do it, like when you went to work for Munters or whatever, they're not going to just turn you loose without training you or probably having you work under someone or whatever.
A lot of it does come from just doing, and but the key things that you have to have in large loss or any loss is you have to have good communication skills. You have to make sure you're documenting everything that you're doing. You have to make sure that you're tracking your production. Are we actually doing what we said we were going to do in the scope of work? It's all encompassing. It's kind of a natural. You kind of have it built in you naturally, I think, in a lot of ways. You're either a natural leader in that area or you're not, because not everybody wants to be at the front of the spear making those decisions and guiding the team through that project. Some they like to be in the shadows a little bit. So it does take a little bit of an A personality, but you can't be an A personality that won't listen, because you have to ask, listen, and provide. So you ask the client what they need, you listen to what they tell you, and then you provide it to what they're asking for. And so probably the number one thing is communication skills and listening skills. We live in a world where I don't think people really listen that well, and I don't think it's getting any better. But that's my what's always worked for me was being able to come in, listen to the client, and then analyze what we need to do. On a daily basis, we want to be asking ourselves when we walk onto that job, what more can we do for the client? Are we doing enough for them? And what else what other services can we provide? And so it's one of those, it's kind of a little bit of everything in there when it comes to experience in managing large loss. The more experience you have, the better.
Are you an advocate for chasing large losses?
Well, I'm not a chaser. It's not in my wheelhouse, but it is part of the business. One of the part of the business is hustle, and the hustlers I mean hustlers in a good way. They're always moving. They tend to eat, and they'll be out there and they'll make things happen. And there's a lot of companies that have scanners, and they're watching the news, what's happening, and they'll go out and do that. And that's great for them. It's never been something that I wanted to do, but there are a lot of companies that do it.
I'm just curious, in your experience, how many of these projects come from pre-existing arrangements or pre-existing relationships versus the people who are chasing after things?
Well, we live in the world of ERPs, emergency response plans, and back in the 80s we used to call them disaster recovery plans, or DRPs. And very effective ways to get work is you're in with the client, the end user, and you get them signed up to where you come in and they give you the details of their building, and you give them preferential treatment should there be a disaster. Those work very well. But relationships today, it's all relationship built. In order to get the business, you have to have people that literally wake up every day wanting to sell something, wanting to talk to somebody about their product, about their service, and you send them out into the universe. And that's, the best way. You have to find those people. When you find them, you have to hire hustle, but you have to be ready to pay hustle, because they're going to succeed and they're going to be out there finding the work for you. And then you have to perform the work, and you have to have the right operations team to make that happen.
And do these guys work more on a bonus system, or are they just paid real well to begin with, or is it a combination?
Well, your operations guys are usually going to be a salary type of guy, and then your supervisors may be on an hourly deal. Most of your salespeople are going to be on a salary with a bonus program. Yeah,
Cliff?
Yeah, would you advise someone aspiring to do large losses to learn gradually by doing larger losses to build the experience and confidence needed to tackling large losses? And, how would you advise them to obtain the experience needed to gain the necessary confidence, to go out and sell a project?
Well, that first one that you do is scary. That first time that you have your $1 million contract in front of you and you're shaking a little bit, as you're putting it across the table, it can be scary. And, but there's many different ways that you can do it. If you're a smaller company, there's a lot of large companies out there that they want a bigger footprint. And sometimes you can be the first responder for them. Say maybe you're in an area where a larger company doesn't have a good coverage, but you know that they work there. And you can become their first responder. So you can get that first 3 to 4 days on the job. And then they come in and they do the majority of the work. And so, but you can get experience on it by having strategic alliances, by strategic partners that you can partner up. And the same thing is true with when you're in catastrophe. If you have a strategic partner that they can call you in and say, hey, Tom, we've got a strip mall, and we got a Dollar General or something that you guys can have. Those types of entry points are really good. Now you can have the cold entry too, where it's like, boom, it hits and you're just, it's game on, we got to make it happen. And sometimes there can be a lot of smoke and mirrors. Most of us have been in those situations where, it's like, you got to make it look good and make it happen. Even though behind the scenes, you might be scrambling to get your production team and everybody in order. But you always have to look like you've been there before. You can't panic. You're not allowed to panic in our business. The client can panic, but the restorer should never be in panic mode, regardless of the situation. You have to be the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to, I was making a couple notes there. I like that
No problem.
point of looking like you've been there before, and also no panic. That in a disaster restoration scenario, it seems to me those are two very important things. I'm wondering if also during those difficult times when you just kind of get thrown into the fire, isn't that when you find some of your better people for those situations?
Believe it or not, some of the people that we hired that were temporary employees at the time, back in the 80s, are now CEOs of restoration companies here in the U.S. And so, yes, when you're doing the job, you can find people that can fit in, and they'll stand out to you. Right away, you'll be able to see, if you have, whatever your labor source is, if it's temporary or if it's, skilled labor, whatever it is, there will be somebody in there that will rise to the top. And our industry is one of those industries, you either love it or you don't. For me, I can't believe it's 39 years. It's crazy, but all of my mentors are still, in the industry, and they've been in it longer. And so it's one of those things when you love this industry, there's just so much. And now, for me, leaving a footprint behind, it's one of my, a little bit of a legacy deal for me. And I still probably have another 9 years before I decide to, go down into second gear or something. So, but right now I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy the industry, and having too much fun doing what we're doing. So
it's more important. This is an industry that seems to be enamored with certifications. What's more important, certifications or experience?
Well, and I'll tell you, this is an old school philosophy, but it's what's old is new again. I will say that there's only one thing that matters, and that is, do you know what you are doing? And you can have certificates. Certificates are great. It's a great place to start. It's a foundation. You need that, especially in today's, where we're running through so many different people. We're constantly in hiring mode. And so you have to have that training foundation. But experience trumps certifications every time. mainly because if you've never been there and done it, then it really doesn't matter, and so experience is everything. If the certificates are great, but do you know what you are doing is the question you have to answer.
Grayson, let's go to halftime. We'll be back with the second half of our interview. We've got Tom McGuire, Large Loss Mastery. Very interesting. I got a bunch of notes already. Looking forward to the second half.
Good.
Our association sponsors are the Environmental Information Association. EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at eia-usa.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, iicrc.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com, improving human, animal, and environmental health with electrostatic spray technology and advanced chemistries at byoplanet.com. Tramex Meters, innovation in moisture detection and humidity monitoring systems since 1974 at tramexmeters.com. EMSL Analytical Inc., providing high-quality, full-service laboratory services since 1981. EMSL.com.
Tom, you've done a wide variety of losses, all different types. What are some of the similarities and differences between estimating and project managing a large water loss versus a large fire loss?
Well, with fire, it's going to be more labor intensive. You're going to have big crews. You're going to have a much more robust project. Water damage, where you're having technicians and you're basically pretty much drying only. You don't have as much labor as you will on the. You'll have a lot of labor, but it won't be as much as, say, a fire job. Fire jobs are great jobs. They're kind of miserable when you're doing them because you smell like smoke for a month or however long you're at the facility. And so most of your clothes get thrown away after the job. But the main thing in difference is in estimating is you're always, when it comes to the fire, you're going to be focusing a lot on what's your labor production, what do we need to produce on a daily basis, to fulfill the scope. And where in drying, we're more along the lines of, it's less along production lines and more along the lines of how is the building drying? Where are we in the science of things? So they're completely different, but very, very much the same in how you manage the jobs. And so from a project management standpoint, I look at them at both of them as being the same. I don't really get too frazzled either way. Water damage jobs are more fun. Fire jobs are going to get dirty and you're going to smell like smoke. But they're very profitable and usually, because one nice thing too about restoration is you get to show what the building looked like before and after. And with fire, it's dramatic. And so, and you can make a dramatic impression also. And that's what I love about, the more challenging the job is, that gives you the better opportunity to come out and shine and actually make make points with the client because they're like, wow, this place looked horrible yesterday. It looks better today. It smells better. The next day, the same thing, the same thing, the same thing. Water damage, it does take a little bit longer because you're probably going to have tear out and replace and all that kind of stuff. That is going to happen after you get done with the drying. And the same thing with fire. There's going to be some things that you're not going to be able to clean. You're going to have to tear them out. So they're both very challenging, but from a project management standpoint, I like them both. They're a little bit different, priorities when it comes down to it, and just how you deal with the client is everything.
Yeah.
Tom, with the more frequent wildfires and their effect on large areas, and I would assume many large losses, have you changed or added information to your courses that focuses specifically on wildfire?
Well, wildfires typically are they're on the outside of the building, and then the HVAC systems bring in the smoke and spreads it throughout the buildings. So in theory, the actual recovery is the same as if it was inside the building, except you just won't have maybe a heavy chemical soot. You'll have a lighter soot, so it'll be more easy to clean than if, say, maybe you had a kitchen fire or something in the hotel lobby. And so really the process is the same, whether it's on the outside or the inside of the building, because the result is what we're after, which is smoke, cleanup, fire, water, whatever the end result is. And so that's really it doesn't change much there, even though the source is different. We might have some outdoor work that we're doing now. We might even get into some landscaping, might even get into some pressure washing on the outside of the building. So that would probably be the main difference between just a regular fire inside the building and say like the California fires, and if they don't destroy everything, then there will be soot on everything, because it's going to get in the building one way or another.
Cliff,
Smoke is.
Go ahead, Tom.
Smoke is like smoke is like water in a lot of ways, and so it's looking for the path of least resistance. And so with water, that's a dry spot or a low spot. With smoke, it's looking for a place to cool, and so typically you're going to find smoke, attaching itself to metal, especially flat metal surfaces, because it's trying to cool. And so it will follow, like water, it will follow pipe chases. It'll follow any type of chase, electrical chase, anything that you have. Elevator systems will pump smoke throughout the building. It's really fun. You can tell that I love this stuff, and so, but I can still
fun, and others might not be the same.
Well, you do have to balance it out with your life. You do, because there was part of my life where I was on the road for 280 days a year for about 10 years, and you have to balance it out. And I balanced it out by living here in Brevard County, close to the beach. The beach is across the street, and that keeps the beachy side in me and lets me relax.
Cliff?
You were on the road for a long time, and it seems to me that, did you suffer burnout? And if so, how do you do it? Because a lot of road warriors just can't do this forever, can't do it for the 10 years or 16 years that you did it. So any secrets to that?
Well, it is tough, and it is not for everybody. I actually enjoyed the road. I enjoyed being in new towns, meeting new people, new buildings, new businesses. But it is not for everybody. And that's why, with Munters, They kept me on the road because they didn't have anybody else that would do it. And of course, they had to pay me for that also. And so, but there is a drawback to it because, relationships, all those things. It's a tough road. It's kind of like a carny in a way. When in our business, one of my bosses with MF Bank said, "Yeah, we're like carnies. We show up, and one day, over here there was a tent with an elephant in it, and today you showed up and there's no tent, there's no elephant. They're gone. The work is done and they're gone." And so you have to have a little bit of that in you. In fact, even for me now, Cliff, if I'm home too long, like if I'm home for like 30 days, I got to go someplace. I got to go just drive, go someplace, go up the coast a little bit, have lunch, do something. I got to get out. And so it does still stick with me to this day.
Tom, I got a text question here from the audience. What is the best way to remove odors from a building? Now, that's a big topic. We could talk for an hour on that, I'm sure. But I wonder if you have any specific tips or things that maybe, obviously we're going to remove whatever the source of the odor is. Everybody knows that,
Yep.
right? But
Yep.
what other kind of tips do you give people on odor control?
Well, without getting into specific deodorization techniques, but I will have to mention Airbotics because they're a sponsor of mine. And so, but you have to remove the source. And regardless of the situation, the odor, you're only going to mask it until you remove the source. Now, with smoke, the longer smoke sits. Now, if it's not char, the longer smoke sits, the odor is also going to dissipate. Now, if it's char, if you have char in the attic, it's always going to smell like char. But if it's just soot, it will eventually, the odor will dissipate. So it's our job to make sure that we get everything cleaned. And then you can use, if you have hydroxyls or, Procure, those are two methods that are two totally different methods, but both very effective for certain applications. And so I think I said that being safe with everyone. But you have to remove the source. If you don't remove the source, we used to have some projects in New York City where we had fires in high rises, and they weren't fires where they caused a lot of destruction, but the smoke traveled via the HVAC or the elevator systems, and soot would be on top of the drop ceiling, for example. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things that we did back in the 80s that I'm probably still doing, but we can't use the chemicals that we had then, because the chemicals we had then, now they're outlawed. You have to go to Mexico or someplace to get them because they cause cancer and all kinds of things. And so you used to be able to, in the office buildings, they wouldn't want you to tear out the ceiling tile. So you'd have to spray the top of the ceiling tile to encapsulate the soot to the top of the ceiling tile. And then when they got around to replacing them or remodeling, they would tear them out. And that was really the only time that I've done anything that we didn't remove the source. We'd encapsulate it, and that can work, but you also you have to have deodorization in there to make it happen. Back in the 80s, really the only deodorization that we had was ozone. And so today you have ozone, you have Procure and hydroxyls.
Cliff?
Well, couple comments on that.
I had a feeling. All right,
yeah,
go ahead.
Okay. Going back, I think, when you're talking about high-rise buildings and wildfires and so on and so forth, the ventilation system can be harnessed. And if you can gain odor control in the ventilation system, And there are ways that you can put, there are gel products, there are liquid evaporating products, and
gel blocks are great.
And you can make a huge difference. Personally, I found that neither ozone nor hydroxyls worked quickly enough. And I mean, I can tell you, I made a career out of solving odor problems in all sorts of buildings, and also did it all over the world, and got paid pretty well for it. But that's the biggest difference that you can make. And I think in many ways it's a lost art now. People, it says, they'll pay me to put these machines in there, and so on and so forth. And we were in and out of those buildings before anyone knew anything was wrong. And I mean, I can't tell you how many inventories and big box stores and furniture stores, clothing stores, no one ever knew there was a fire, and we got paid very well for it. So I think it's an art. I think every fire's a little bit different. They have to be handled in some different ways.
We should probably put a couple links to the shows you've done on odor control, Cliff, in the blog, maybe.
Yeah, we will. We can do that.
Yeah, we used a lot of gel block, and that was one of the first things that we would do when we come in on a big job. Is you put a little gel block inside the HVAC handler, and it gives you, it gives them it gives the client a little bit of it smells better. So it smells better, so it must be better. And you can put in, charcoal filters and stuff like that too that will help. And so there's a lot of things. The HVAC system is a very important part of your deodorization.
Cliff, you got one more before we go to roundup?
Yeah, I do. In terms of your software, can you use it on both fires and water losses,
Yes.
or is it more water oriented? Okay, why don't you just tell us just a little bit about how it can accomplish what it accomplishes so quickly? And go ahead.
Well, it's originally it's the formulas in the Edge, which is our estimating software, have been in existence since the late 90s. And we originally put them together because we were onboarding people and we needed to bring them up to speed very quickly. And so we're taking people that had never estimated a job before and giving them a tool to do that. So in 1998, I sketched out my first plan for the software that we have today. I wish I would have put it together in 98, but it was a lot more expensive to develop in 98 than it is in 2025. And so 2020, we brought out the Edge. And the reason why it works so fast, and it works either on fire, water, mold, asbestos, reconstruction, is it's a production rate based estimating tool. And what that means is we focus on what we should expect out of our people. And a very good friend and mentor of mine, Brad Key, back in the 90s, Brad he loves data. And so Brad has a lot of data and experience. And so we took the foundation of what we put together back in the 90s and plugged it into the Edge. And so it's all based on experience and data from projects that have been done in the past. And so it makes it very fast. Number one, once we know the damage assessment, we have the damage assessment done, then we can go into the estimating process very, very quickly. You still have to do the damage assessment. We still got to know what was damaged, what type of facility, what type of damage, what the severity of the damage is. And then the number one thing that we need to know is what's the total square footage footprint of the damage. And then from there, we factor in, what are our calendar days to complete the job, or our working days. How many working days do we have to do the job? A lot of times the clients are going to dictate to us. They're going to say, all right, so we have this big thing coming up. We want you guys out of here, in 18 days. So then we know, all right, here's what we got. Then we plug in our production rate. And so for each facility type, we know from our experience and our data that we have a starting point for each facility. So each facility, whether it's residential, educational, hospitality, library, museum, whatever it is, they all have a starting point for production rate. And so that's the foundation of the estimating tool. So once you enter in your production rate, your square footage, and your calendar days, it instantly calculates your first set of numbers, which is never the number, but it instantly calculates using all of our formulas. And so we can usually put together, and I can, if I'm working with clients and we've finished the damage assessment, we can usually have an estimate together in about 45 minutes to an hour.
So let's go. Okay. Just a couple questions. So we have a building, and the footprint is, I don't know, 50,000 square feet. I mean, this could be a warehouse that has nothing in it. Okay.
Yep.
Or this could be a storage facility, which is filled with boxes of documents or whatever. So
Yep.
how does the data change for those two different scenarios?
Both of those scenarios. So you have a warehouse, and then you have a 10,000 square feet warehouse and a 10,000 square feet office building, two totally different things. So they're going to have two totally different starting points for your production rate. And then the deciding factors are going to be, okay, what's the build out? What type of build out do we have in the buildings? What type of construction? What's the severity of the damage? What type of damage? All of those things are going to affect then the production rate, usually bringing it down from our starting point. And depending upon where you are, say for example, hospitality is heads and beds. Hotel managers want to know, when you're going to give me my beds back so I can get heads in those beds. And then when you're getting out of my hotel. Whereas when you go to work at a hospital, they're concerned about heads and beds too, but they're more concerned about, okay, who's coming in and working in my building, and what are you going to do exactly, specifically, and then what's the qualifications of the people in the building. So each building is a little bit different. So each building in our formulas will factor in, and you'll get your production rate based on everything that applies to that specific job in that specific facility. So it's completely adjustable to whatever type of facility that you have or whatever type of damage that you have.
So essentially this is time and material estimating. Yes. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yes, it's T&M based. However, it is a companion tool for, say, Xactimate. A lot of guys use the Edge on the front end because it can get them their numbers very quickly, and then they'll back in with Xactimate. So especially out in catastrophe, where you'll have 30 jobs a day that you have to estimate. Well, we have to figure out we need our ROMs. We got to get our ROMs for all of these jobs, and we can do that in the Edge, and then back in if we have to do Xactimate on the jobs, or if we're doing time and materials, then you can use the Edge to do the actual estimate in time and materials for that project.
For the audience, explain what ROMs are.
ROM is a term that just kind of popped up over the last 10 years. It's a random order of magnitude.
Okay.
I think it's a military term that somebody plugged in with one of the consulting firms plugged it in, because it wasn't around up until the last 10, 15 years. But I think in the military it's a military term. So basically it's your budget. What's your budget number? And so, because the first thing the adjuster is going to ask you for in the first time he meets you, and you've been on the job for 5 minutes, and he's going to say, how much is it going to be? And the one thing you don't want to say is you don't want to give anybody a number, because that's going to be the first number that you give them is the only number they are going to remember.
Right.
And so make sure it's a good one, and then give them a range. I'm a range guy. I'm not don't lock me down to, it's a range. It's going to be between this number and this number, or this much square foot, this much square foot, and give them a range.
That's a great tip, Tom. Let's go to the roundup, Grayson. All right, today's roundup brought to us by tramxmeters.com. I also want to mention that EMSL.com has come back on board, EMSL Analytical Laboratory. All right, let's go to the restoration industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli. I'm sure you've got a list of things to talk about.
Actually, I might surprise you. Listening, hey, Tom, I don't know if you saw in there, but Mickey called in. I texted him when you came on. I said, Mickey, you better call in. What are you talking about? So he's on there. No, listening to you, Tom, it's like taking a walk down memory lane. Cliff and myself are a few years older than you. So when we got started, it was in the 70s. And kind of the early guys in restoration were mid to late 60s. Some of the well-known franchises expanded from commercial cleaning into that, but most of the insurance work at the time was actual cash value, or mostly just fire reconstruction kind of stuff. That was, I didn't call it that. Of course, when Marty got into it, and guys like Lee Pemberton and the slew of these guys, they came from the dry cleaning industry, and then that's how they got into the contents end. The first time I ran into you talk about the BMS CAT guys, mm-hmm. was, I want to say it was in the early 80s, mm-hmm. and we did a national NIFR, which was the Fire Restoration Division of RAA back then. It was in San Diego, and couple of the BMS guys came. We had a packed room, and Gene Matson actually was alive then and talking. He was a real pioneer. And I remember it was a 2-day seminar, and by the morning break they were gone because their pagers went off. Back then you only had pagers.
No, if you had pagers.
Yeah, right. But there was always somebody at the corporate headquarters with the ticket tape. They used to do the ticket tape like on Wall Street, and that's how they used to track a lot of these losses that came in. I will tell you, by the time I, moved to California, and then before I was working, went to work with Dry's, the BMS CAT guys started spreading all over the place. A couple of them moved out to California and started different companies. And, to this day, BMS CAT and Munters, obviously, as you're well aware, had a terrific mm-hmm. relationship. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of these guys, that they become the university for the industry, basically, when you're talking about experience. So the MF Banks, the restoration company. Matter of fact, is Buddy Barrow still around? Was he one of the guys?
Buddy, yeah. Buddy, Buddy is one of the guys from MF Bank. Bill Boss, Nancy Leo.
Oh yeah. So I know all of them. And what happened is, Buddy, a bunch of them came to water damage class I did in the early 90s at Johnstown in Chicago. And they said, who is this guy? He said, it's just a battalion kid from New York, But we went out to dinner when that had fun. But he told some stories about the first World Trade Center cleaning.
Yeah.
And I better not mention anything that he said because it'll get me in trouble. But let me tell you, it was very funny. Maybe we'll talk about it at the convention over something.
Well, I was there, so I might have been. So, and it was a fantastic experience, Pete. I tell everybody in my classes, I wish I had a little jar that I could open up and just let it out. And it gives me goosebumps even to this day thinking about that job. And it was just it was patriotic. It was awesome. Everybody was working hard on a mission, and it was accomplished. And the talent level of the people that we had on our team at MF Bank, the restoration company, was just phenomenal. And
Yeah.
I don't.
No, I remember that job, and I knew other people that worked on the job, and so many of the Munters people too. And they went on to work for other companies. They become accomplished in their own right. That was kind of before Belfour was Belfour, when it was Inricon, and everything kind of evolved from there. And then Serpro evolved, so that, the industry's obviously come a long way over those years, but those are all the original roots and all those lessons that got passed on by, guys like us and Cliff, and there were others too who got started early. I think were important for the next generation because they don't need to reinvent the wheel. And I remember when I first saw you market your first class, and you had Mickey, and I knew Brad Key and a lot of the Munters guys, because I would call Mickey up when the Aussies or any people from the UK would come over and they wanted to go visit job sites. I'd call a lot of my RA members, and Mickey was one, and they would, we'd go to the hospital, we'd go to whatever projects they're working on. They'd show us around, in a collegial way, and it was very nice to be able to kind of spread the global message. So anyway, it was interesting, and like I say, it's kind of a walk down memory lane listening to all of that stuff. And I wish you really the best and the success in your program. I mean, the heart and the basis of everything is time and material billing. We all know that.
Yep.
And I remember, Mickey, when we had the pricing debates and we were debating unit cost versus time and material, and Mickey talked about the framework agreements, in the UK. And
in the Europeans,
oh boy, he said, you better be careful what you ask for, because you do a great job. And then after the agreement's over a few years later, they say, well, you did a wonderful job. We'd like to renew it. So your cost went up, but we'd like you to see if you can discount it even more. So, it isn't always a good thing. But I was raised in the industry as a time and material guy. And I always believed in that if you had to understand that first before you can even interpret a unit cost and what it meant anyway. So I'm glad to see more of that's going on in the industry with guys like Greg Dillon and others. They're starting to embrace it more, because it really is kind of a big missing thing. So anyway.
And Pete, it's the art of estimating relies on the human factor. It relies on human input. And AI is great and everything, but you're always going to have that human input on projects. And so, and more and more people are doing time and materials with budget numbers, in ROM numbers now than ever before, and very happy about that. But it's exciting times, and like I said, I've been very blessed, and, left from working with some incredibly talented people. And then Mickey, hired me on, and Mickey, Mickey's an icon and a dear friend and a mentor. And I love my conversations with Mickey. And so, and likewise with you guys. I mean, this has been a phenomenal, interview. I'm very happy to be here with you guys today. Very psyched. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so look, I got one thing I'd like to close with. I'll turn it back over to the boys to the wrap up. So when you talk about the different with estimating and project management, back in the day, I used to go do a lot of guest lectures once or twice a year for the program with Randy Rapp at Purdue. I was kind of like the ROTC recruiter on campus, trying to get these guys in the construction management area to look at restoration. And we had a certain amount of success with it. But I talked about the two different models in the industry. I'm just curious, you either have what I call the cradle to grave model, where the same person estimates and project manages, or else you have the estimating as a separate sales function, and then the production model where they'll turn it over operations and production people to actually manage and to complete the work. You have a preference one way, or maybe make a comment in that, something that Cliff could put in the blog. And I think that's interesting, because I think both are probably still being used in the industry, but do you see a predominance one way or the other, and what's your personal preference?
Well, I think what's happened, Pete, is you have a new title that was developed over the last 15 years, project director. And so the project director is kind of become an estimator and project manager, project coordinator type of type of role. And so you don't have as much of because back in the day, it used to be you had your sales team and your ops team. Sales came in, took care, did their thing. Ops came in and found out, oh my God, they didn't see half of the building, and then we had to fix it. I think you still have a lot of that. But there is still, and then you have outsourcing. A lot of people are outsourcing their estimates and stuff, which I'm not a big fan of. I think you have to be really close to your estimates and your scope of work so that you understand exactly what you're supposed to be doing, so that you can actually perform. But I'm an advocate for the human factor in estimating, and I hope that never goes away to where you're just plugging something into a computer and it's spitting out a number to you generically. And so the human factor always has to be there. So
are you saying then that you like the idea of a project director because they're taking cradle to grave?
I do like cradle to grave. However, it depends upon your organization. If you're still in if you're in an organization where you have your sales group and they're going out and they're doing it, and then you have your ops teams come in, that works too. I agree with that. I was on the ops side of things. So
yeah, the reason I was saying that was because when it's a cradle to grave, then not only do you have to estimate the job, you got to have good production and good internal coordination, good assistance. But then at the end, you got to collect the money. The problem with down the middle is one blames the other, and boom, and before you know it, you're going around in a circle. But I say both really work, but you have to have tight controls.
Yep.
If one person, but it's hard to get these directed types, and everybody wants them. It was the number one question when I traveled around the country doing a lot of training back in the day. People said, "Hey, Pete, you know any good project manager?" I say, "You know how many people ask me that question?" And I actually think where it starts, in my opinion, my last comment, the first article that I ever wrote in the industry for John Downey, when he owned CleanFax in the mid-'90s, was called Lead Technician of Heart and Soul Restoration Company. I think it starts with good lead technicians running, 1 to 4 people under them, right? Those guys eventually become supervisors and project managers, train them within, and they learn from the ground up, and then you can teach them estimating some of the other stuff. And I think they're the heart and soul, your lead guys and your project managers. You got to have someone oversee the whole project. That's essentially what the restoration industry offers. You need everything else, but if you don't have good lead guys and good project managers, you can't get the work done. So anyway, good on you, Tom. Just keep up the good work, training the people out there and developing the next generation, leaving your legacy behind. And I look forward to seeing you in West Palm Beach at the convention.
We'll see you in West Palm.
Well, thank you, Pete. The restoration industry's global watchdog. Pete, can you Cliff, you have one final question?
Yeah, I do. Tom, I'd like you to tell the audience the difference between two words, accelerate versus celebrate.
This is something that I've always said, and I kind of this is something that I told myself whenever I'm having a good year. It's not a time to celebrate. It's a time to accelerate. And so put your foot on the gas. And it's like, we're here in across the street from the beach. And when you're riding the wave, you ride the wave. When the wave's over, that's when you can stop and smell the roses. But when you're in that phase of acceleration, it's yes. Let's high five, but let's go out the door and continue the ride the wave. There'll be a time for celebrating when we're done, and so that's kind of my feeling about accelerate and celebrate. And that's kind of one of the things I was using when coming out of COVID. Because it was really shaky, and I was my business was 2 years old. My training business was 2 years old. And I was like, oh, you're kidding me. And we're in the middle, now we're going to have COVID and no one's going anywhere, doing anything. So I had to sit down and figure out how are we going to keep this thing going? How do I train people live when, no one wants to travel. And so we moved everything to Florida, took everything off the West Coast, and got masks and hand sanitizer and said, we're open for business. And so that year was all acceleration, and there was no celebrating until the end of 2020. That was a brutal year, but it ended up being good, because the one thing I learned out of that year is no matter what, you have to keep momentum. Momentum has to, so if you're at a slow spot in your business, keep momentum, because that's the key. Even though you might have a down year, the next year can be phenomenal if you keep your momentum going.
Tom, we appreciate you joining us. Before we go, is there anything we missed that you'd like to add? Any final thoughts for our audience?
No, I'm very happy to be here with you guys. This was really cool. I love it, and I look forward to seeing you guys in West Palm.
We will see you soon. The end of the month, RIA. What's the dates, Pete? April 28th to 30.
28th to the 30th. The pre-conference stuff, building science and the project management, starts on the 27th. And then on the evening of the 30th, from 6 to 10 in the Palm Beach Convention Center, they're going to be roasting me. And they're going to have a lot of my friends there. And it's going to be fun, but we're doing it for a worthy cause. The net proceeds, after they pay for the dinner or whatnot, is going to go into the RA Education Fund, because the RA has three things: educate, advocate, and elevate the industry. And so anyway, I hope you can make it. They have the cutoff date, Joe, on that is the 17th, because the caterers establish that date. They need to know when to order the food, because I kind of said, I don't want just one plate of food. I got to have three options. So that made it more complicated. And so, Tom, that set back.
Imagine that.
Yeah, exactly. So you got a beef and chicken, and for my vegetarian friends, a big mushroom that Cliff ordered with squash on the side, big portobello mushroom. But anyway, it's going to be fun, and I just look forward to seeing a lot of my friends there. And you're going to see a lot of people you might not have seen in a while there, Mr. Tom.
No, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right. Our thanks to this week's guest, Tom McGuire, Cliff the Z-Man Zlotnick, the Restoration Global Watchdog, Pete Consigli, our engineer, Grayson Gone Fish and Fisher. And next week, we'll be back with the legend, the training legend in my mind, Barry Costa.
Barry Costa.
For years, I went around this country teaching people, and the one name that kept coming up as the best instructor out there was Barry Costa.
And I got that on my calendar too. I'll be calling in for Barry's show. I only run into him occasionally, but Barry's fabulous. I'm happy that we're going to be able to tell his life story in 1 hour.
So come back and join us next Friday at noon for the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.